I knew it! I predicted it! Everyone kept asking what was gonna happen with the iPod lineup, and what did I always say? Every single time, what did I say? They could be discontinued any single day now. We should just expect that. And now it's officially happened. The iPod Nano and the iPod Shuffle have been officially removed from the Apple Store. Both online, I don't know if they're still selling them in actual stores, but it's no longer on the website. In fact, it was already kind of hard to get to the iPod section of Apple.com because it was hidden within the music section and it wasn't even at the top. In fact, before you see the link to the iPod selection, the first thing you see is Apple Music. After that, they wanted to show you AirPods. After that, now they want to show you the HomePod. Then after all of those things, you finally got to a little tab at the bottom of the page that said, oh, and yeah, we also sell iPods. So that's how I knew Apple had no plans to continue the iPod lineup. And honestly, it makes sense. Why should they at this point? There's no logical reason in 2017 to be selling something that only does one thing: play music. Now, to be fair, the iPod was always a big part of Apple's history. It was an industry that they absolutely revolutionized. The first Apple product I ever owned was an iPod Nano 4th generation. I loved that thing and I used it a lot, but let's be honest, that's not where the world is heading anymore. A lot of people used to say that, iPods were for kids and iPhones were for adults, but now with parents wanting to check in with their kids when they're at school or when they're at friends' houses more often, most parents are just giving their young ones iPhones. Something I definitely didn't get to enjoy. I didn't get an iPhone until my freshman year of high school. It was the iPhone 5, by the way, and I was like the coolest kid that day at school. But now there's kids that are like in the 4th grade and they still have iPhones, and younger, I'm sure. So what's the point of the iPods? Apple no longer has a demand to make products that can do only really one feature. I guess you could kind of watch movies on the Nano, but for the most part, the Nano and Shuffle were extremely dated products. In fact, the iPod Shuffle still shipped with a headphone jack to USB-A cable, something that is like the exact opposite of what Apple is trying to tell everyone to use right now. They're trying to move everyone towards USB-C and Lightning, and that iPod had a headphone jack to USB-A cable, and that's how you charged it. It was so completely counterintuitive. In fact, I don't even think on the iPod Nanos and iPod Shuffles you were capable of putting Apple Music on it, and since they want Apple Music on everything now, what was the point of that? Now, to be fair, the iPod Touch is still here. I think that's because its processor allows it to run iOS 11, just barely. It can't run it very well, but it can just barely make it, so they're keeping it around just for a little while, probably trying to sell all of them they can before they completely stop producing them and stop supporting them. And once we get to that point, I bet you that we'll hear about it in the news. The iPod Touch will be removed from the Apple Store, and then the age of the iPod will be officially over. I don't think there's any plans on refreshing the new iPod Touch, and I get that there's a lot of people out there who wanted a 7th generation or whatever, but here's the problem I've had with that. The iPod Touch was often looked at as the iPhone without a contract, right? That was my first iOS device. I had the iPod Touch 4th generation. It had a camera on it. I was also the coolest kid on the block back in those days. I was in middle school at the time. The thing is, though, they want to make sure that all of their best premium hardware and software is always given to the iPhone first. That has cellular connectivity, that has the better processors. That's clearly the better product, and Apple wanted to make sure that when the iPod Touch and the iPhone were competing with each other, that the iPhone always had the upper hand. There were extremely rare occasions where the iPod Touch actually was better at an iPhone for something. If anything, I would say the iPod Touches were usually thinner than the iPhones, but then again, they don't have as much stuff on the inside of it, so there you go. So if people were expecting in 2017 for there to be an iPod Touch refresh, keep in mind, no matter what the refresh would be, it could never be as good as any of the iPhones currently. That means that it could not be as good as the iPhone SE. They would not put the same camera in that because they don't want people buying the iPod Touch instead of the iPhone. Apple can get you in a contract and in a cycle with the iPhones, and the iPod Touch is a one-time purchase. And besides, these days, who would prefer to have a device that is Wi-Fi only and in your pocket? I get a lot of you out there just don't want an annual contract. You don't want Verizon, AT&T. You just want the phone to work and you'll just use it when there's Wi-Fi. The thing is, though, you can still do that with iPhones. You can just buy them unlocked, and with the iPhone SE especially, that's not even that expensive anymore. You can get an unlocked iPhone that can only work with Wi-Fi, but it'll have all the great features of a full-fledged iPhone, like the 4K camera, running iOS 11, and of course it gets you that foot in the door to use all of Apple's great ecosystem accessories, as in AirPods and the Apple Watch. You can do all that already just with an unlocked iPhone, so it doesn't really make sense to have an iPod Touch even in this era. I think the only reason it's still on their website is they're trying to ship them out. They're trying to sell all of them and say, we're done, there's no more iPods, but they don't want just a whole bunch of them stacked up and have nowhere to go with them. So yes, this is a little bit sad. I probably sounded a little harsh earlier. I don't hate the iPods, I just think they had their time and it's time to move on from them and realize that that our products today, if we're paying top dollar for them, they need to be good at doing lots of things, not just one thing. I don't think there's much demand for MP3 players anymore either. So I can remember a day when there was a wide array of iPods. I remember they had the iPod Shuffle, the Nano, the Classic, and the Touch. All of those lineups have now been reduced to just one, the iPod Touch, because it can run iOS. It's really close to not being supported though, and I think that any day now we should expect that to be discontinued, and then the iPod will be officially declared dead. I'm sorry for all you iPod fans out there, especially if you were expecting a refresh sometime soon. I can guarantee you right now, it's just not gonna happen. There's not gonna be some lightning port iPod Shuffle. There's not gonna be some completely touchscreen iPod Nano coming. The time has come to say goodbye to this lineup. It served its purpose, it revolutionized an industry, but the iPhone is still king, and it's going to be that way for a very, very long time. What are your morning thoughts on the iPod lineup? Let me know in the comments below. I'm still gonna hang on tight to my iPod collection I still have growing. Definitely don't use them, but it's just nice to have them as memorabilia to remember a different time in Apple's history. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.